In the 19th century, Boston was known as the Athens of America. New institutions of culture and education were springing up along the former mudflats of the Back Bay.
There was a lot of wealthy families by that time, and they were beginning to separate out popular culture from elite culture and promoted themselves with a lot of these institutions. The MFA, the new Boston Public Library, all these sort of beautiful buildings, the Natural History Museum, MIT was in the Back Bay, the Symphony, all these sort of educational and cultural institutions were establishing themselves.
Toward the end of the century, this rapidly changing world brought together a small group of young artists who called themselves the Visionists. Although the group has nearly been forgotten, its members left an important legacy through the work they created and the people they inspired. The Visionists were a circle of friends centered around writer and architect Ralph Adams Cram, who described their meeting place in his autobiography.
We had our hideout in Province Court, on the third floor of a disreputably decadent building. On the walls, the painter members had wrought strange and wonderful things, the Lady Isis in her Egyptian glory, symbolic devices of various sorts, mostly oriental and esoteric. Word got abroad that it was a queer sort of place, and in certain more conservative circles, this did no good for our budding reputations. There was no ground for their suspicions, whatever they may have been. There was no beverage more potent than beer, while the smoke was innocent of any aroma other than that of pipes and cigarettes, or, on occasion, the lingering perfume of incense when Herbert Copeland officiated as exarch and high priest of Isis, clothed garishly in theatrical costumes.
I envision a visionist meeting sort of, it's fun to get dressed up in costume, right? Like, we're going to take on these identities, we're going to go discuss serious ideas, but we're going to do it in a way that kind of pushes the boundary of what any one of us could do solely, and kind of together what might happen. This is a time period where there isn't a whole lot of visual entertainment. So in middle-class homes, like a common after-dinner form of entertainment would have been to dress up and to like make a picture. So putting on costumes and things like that. I think the Visionists take it to another level.
This group started with what they called the Pewter Mugs, which was a dining club. And then the Visionists were sort of a little bit more serious in a smaller group, and they were really concerned with bringing some sort of beauty, truth, craftsmanship back into life.
It's a clubbing century, so people join clubs for any number of reasons. When your friends belong to different clubs, kind of interact with these different circles of people, you finally find your own like-minded crew.
The Visionists were brought together by shared interests in contemporary artists and cultural movements, including writer Oscar Wilde and the aesthetic movement, painter-poet Dante Gabriel Rossetti and the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, artist-designer William Morris and the arts and crafts movement, as well as occultist writer H.P. Blavatsky and the Theosophy movement.
They kind of establish an intellectual circle, and then, as people still do, they kind of get their creativity going, and they a little bit break off on their own. So we meet at this place fosters the connection, and then we kind of move into, well, what if we started our own literary journal, right? What if we started a magazine? What if we started publishing our friends?
Members of the Visionists helped create two journals, The Mahogany Tree and The Knight Errant, published by member Francis Watts Lee. In the first issue of The Knight Errant, they set forth their view of the modern world.
One by one, in this last night, the beautiful things have disappeared, until at last, in a world grown old and ugly, men forced to find some excuse for the peculiarity of their environment, have discredited even beauty itself, finding it childish, unworthy, and unscientific. Not only beauty in art, but beauty in thought and motive, beauty in life and death, until the word has become but a memory and a reproach. This is the condition that demands the new chivalry.
The journal's title came from a poem by visionist Louise Imogen Guiney. Oh, give my faith My youth, my sword, choice of the heart's desire, a short life in the saddle, Lord, not long life by the fire.
They really, I think, were on this quest, and they frame it as a quest with the knight errant. They're on this quest for truth and beauty and the celebration of art and friendship in really its purest form.
Guiney, who was a member of several different literary clubs, introduced Cram to many of the friends who would form the Visionists. One of her closest friends would come to embody the group's spirit of creativity and collaboration, publisher and photographer Fred Holland Day. Day was born to a wealthy family in the part of Dedham, Massachusetts that is now Norwood. As a child, he was an avid reader and collector, and his hero was romantic poet John Keats. In fact, Day and Guiney helped to organize the first public memorial for Keats in England. Inspired by his travels in Europe, Day oversaw the renovation of his family's home to the Tudor style and filled it with art. It would become a favorite gathering place for the Visionists. With fellow Visionist Herbert Copeland, Day founded a small publishing firm, Copeland & Day. Inspired by William Morris's Kelmscott Press, they championed fine craftsmanship and quality materials in bookmaking.
This was the flowering of small presses in Boston in this era, and all kind of stemming from the arts and crafts movement as well, like a true appreciation of the beauty of fine print.
Copeland & Day were the American publishers of Oscar Wilde's Salome, with illustrations by Aubrey Beardsley, as well as the risque English journal, The Yellow Book. Their series of poetry books, Songs from Vagabondia, was written by fellow Visionists Bliss Carman and Richard Hovey, and illustrated by Visionist Thomas Meteyard. Over time, Day's energy shifted to what would become his lifelong passion, photography. He began taking pictures to document his visits to important literary sites in England, but came to see photography as artistic expression, drawing inspiration from visual artists. His work included portraits of his many fascinating acquaintances, often in costumes from his collection. He also shot many male nudes, working with professional art models. He drew much of his inspiration from classical mythology and religious themes. For his Sacred Subjects project, he reenacted the crucifixion on a hillside in Norwood, casting himself as Christ and his friends as saints or Roman soldiers. His bold vision attracted the attention of others working to establish photography as a fine art. After well-received exhibitions of his work in Philadelphia and London, Day quickly became one of the world's best-known photographers.
Fred Holland Day was, along with Alfred Stieglitz, probably the most important two American photographers. They both advocated for photography as a fine art. Fred put together a show, an exhibition that he put on in London and Paris in 1900 and 1901, which really established American photographers before a European audience. He was very well thought of both in Europe and America as being innovative, creative, unique as a pictorialist. Because of the sort of rift between them, where Stieglitz told people not to put on this show that was called the New School of American Photography, he did not join the Photo Secession, which was Stieglitz's group. He also did not want his work reprinted in Stieglitz's journals. So he sort of disappears. And I think when people begin to look at the history of photography, they start with Stieglitz and they start with the journals and they start in New York. And he's not there.
Day was a friend and mentor to many other photographers, including a young Edward Steichen. Steichen would soon become one of the most influential photographers of the 20th century, the most frequently featured contributor to Stieglitz's journals, and one of the first fashion photographers working for Vogue and Vanity Fair. Day served as an advisor to photography clubs at several different schools. This allowed him to meet students from a variety of backgrounds, some of whom became his models or friends.
He's sort of a self-taught and a self-educated about art and beauty. And I think that sort of opened him up and allowed him to be very understanding and encouraging to a lot of different people.
In 1896, he received a letter from a friend who was a social worker with the Boston Children's Aid Society. Dear Mr. Day, I'm wondering if you may happen to have any artist friend who would care to become interested in a little Assyrian boy, Kahlil G. He strolled into a drawing class at the college settlement and showed a sufficient ability to make Miss Pierce feel that he was capable of someday earning his living in a better way than by selling matches or newspapers on the street. A drawing he made at the library of the Bacchante made quite a sensation. Day met with 13-year-old Kahlil Gibran, let him help out in his studio, and lent him books from his collection. Not long after, Gibran's family sent him back to his native Lebanon to further his education. When he returned to Boston in his 20s, Day hosted the first exhibition of Gibran's visual art. Through Day, Gibran met Mary Elizabeth Haskell, who would become his close friend and a key supporter of his work. His 1923 book, The Prophet, would become an alternative Bible for the 20th century, making Kahlil Gibran one of the best-selling poets of all time. The names of Day's Visionist friends may not be as familiar as those of his protégés, but many left lasting legacies in their fields. Ralph Adams Cram went on to a prolific career in architecture. Inspired by pre-Raphaelite critic John Ruskin, he championed a neo-Gothic approach to architecture, applying medieval principles to modern applications. He made a name for himself designing churches around New England. Visionist architect and visual artist Bertram Goodhue came to Boston to work for Cram's firm and later became a partner. In 1902, the firm won a competition to become master planners and architects for the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. This led to jobs designing campus buildings or master plans for Princeton and several other colleges and universities, and a role for Cram as head of the architecture department at MIT. In 1916, Cram helped create a pageant to celebrate MIT's move from Boston to Cambridge with 1,700 participants in costume and cast himself as Merlin. His career designing churches and public buildings included the Cathedral of St. John the Divine in New York City, one of the largest Gothic churches in the world, as well as the bridges between Plymouth and Cape Cod. Not long after his death in 1942, his firm paid tribute to the style he established with a new building for the John Hancock Company in the Back Bay. Louise Imogen Guiney eventually moved to England, where she became a prolific poet and writer on Catholic issues. Visual artist Thomas Meteyard spent time in France, studying under Monet at Giverny, and helped bring the Impressionist movement to America. He and his mother owned a beach house in Scituate that was a favorite retreat for the Visionists.
There become these kind of Visionist vacation haunts, like day trips, and Scituate, where Meteyard lives and his mother lives, becomes one of them. So like they'll leave the city, they'll go out to Testudo, which is his studio, and kind of that house, and they'll have a party, right? They'll go out to Norwood, where Day lives, and they'll have a party. So they'll leave the city and they'll kind of benefit from what a lot of the friends have that other ones don't, like the things that living comfortably in the suburbs can get you.
Not much is known about visionist and musician Fred Bullard, except that he and Richard Hovey wrote the Stein Song, which became the Visionists' favorite drinking song.
Give a rouse then in the Maytime for a life that knows no fear.
Over 100 years later, Boston is still a special place for the arts, where creative people form unique connections and lifelong friendships that begin in unexpected places, often relying on the generosity of friends for gathering space or opportunities to get out of the city.
Altogether, it was a great moment in history, not only for our small group in Boston, but in actuality. There was no sign on the horizon of destiny, no indication of the coming era of big business, mass production, and high finance. There was a spirit of high adventure, energized by a buoyant optimism. Has youth today the crescent hope and courage and bright vision of good things to come? I doubt it, and I am not surprised. It is true, however, that the world needs these things now, even more than then, and for my own part, I think there are signs that soon they may return.
that knows no fear, and turn nighttime into daytime with the sunlight of good cheer. For it's always fair weather when good fellows get together, with a stein on the table and a good song ringing clear. For it's always fair weather when good fellows get together, with a stein on the table